So welcome to part 6 of the Penny Family History Slideshow. Once again, my name is David Penny, and in this episode we're going to be looking at the immigration of the Pennies from Scotland to Canada and Toronto ultimately. We'll also have a look at the life of Uncle Jim. We have relatively few photos of Uncle Jim, and he led a very interesting life, what we know of it anyways. So I'll briefly cover that off in a detour. And then we'll end this episode just before Allan meets Phyllis. So before we get going, of course, you know what we have to do. Put it on pause. I'll wait. Grab your drink, ideally a Scotch whiskey, and let's have a toast to the Penny family history and the successful execution of the Penny Family History Slideshow. Cheers. Very tasty. So again, just quickly to orient ourselves, we're referring now to John Clark Penny and his wife Anne Gavin Ross. They're the original Pennies who might immigrate to Canada. Recall that Jim and Jack had visited Canada before that point. Jack perished in World War I, and so he wasn't there to immigrate in the 1920s when the rest of the family did. And then we have Alex and Annie and Allan, who all came over to Canada. So those are the Pennies generally that we're talking about. So here's the timeline of when the Pennies came over. Jim and Alec came first in May of 1920. I think in the previous video I misspoke and said Annie came first. But no, Jim and Alec came together and they came first, followed by Annie in September of 1920, and then followed by Jock and Anne with Allan, their son, their youngest son, and Mal, of course, Annie's son that Jock and Anne had essentially adopted. And they all get actually dispersed to different, Jim goes one place, Alec goes someplace else, Annie goes someplace else, and Allan actually goes someplace else, and Jock, Anne, and Mal are together. And then soon after this, they all converge together, other than Jim, into Toronto. So let's go over that now. Jim and Alex set sail from Liverpool on May 15th, 1920, bound for Canada. And they're heading there to do farm work initially. So we have the name of the ship is the Megantic out of Liverpool on the 15th of May, 1920, bound for Quebec and Montreal. And here we have James Penny over here and Alex Penny over here. Third class, so the cheapest, they're going to get off at Quebec. And they're going to do farm work, as will this guy. And again, the ages here, 30 and 24. So here is Jim's immigration form, Ocean Arrivals Immigration Form 30A, aboard the ship, as you can see, the Megantic over here. So his intended occupation was farm laborer. He says the object in coming to Canada is, quote, to better my position. Here he lists the previous time he was in Canada, which is something I didn't know until I saw this form. But he lists that he was away from Canada. He was basically in Canada, so he kind of claimed, and then away from Canada from June 19th, 1918 until December 18th, 1918 on a 6-month holiday, it says over here. So he went for a holiday in Scotland. So I guess this implies that he must have been in Canada after the war. Remember, Jim got injured in the war and was discharged early. And so he must have come back to Canada and intended to live there, but just going back for a vacation. Jim had with him $1,000. That's, I guess, cash with him. Inflation adjusted, that would be about $15,000 today. So imagine being in third class on the ship with $15,000 in your pocket. I guess he knew how to take care of himself. Passage is paid by self, so he wasn't indentured. He wasn't obliged to go work for a farm or anything like that. It gives his destination as Mr. Ross, and I think it's Mr. Ross at Clayfield Farm in Jarvis, Ontario. So So I don't know exactly who that is, but obviously Mr. Ross is some kind of a relation on his mom's side that he was initially at least going to stay with. And Jarvis, Ontario is kind of around the corner past Hamilton, getting towards Niagara. So that was a different destination than everyone else. He lists his nearest relative as his mother, Anne Penny, at 82A Harla Road in Inverary. And I always find that Jim, when he lists his nearest relative, he gives his mother. When he writes his letters or his postcards, he always addresses him to his mother, whereas the other kids were addressing it to their father and mother, or sometimes just to father, with notes to the mom in there. So obviously, Jim felt closer to his mom, and again, it kind of bolsters the theory that Jock wasn't Jim's natural parent. And it also says that, in terms of being physically defective, he has the loss of his left eye. So let's go on a little detour for Uncle Jim at this point. So Jim goes traveling, and in 1929, we know for sure that he went traveling to Bermuda. And I think that was just a bit of a vacation. And maybe he's also looking at a place to settle, because he eventually does go to the Caribbean to settle down, to try to where life is cheaper and he can get by on just his pension. But he writes this little postcard from a view from Paget, Bermuda. He addresses it to Mrs. A. Penny at 367 Keewatin. Dear mother, arrived in Bermuda last night. Ever since was a bit sick, but it was my stomach. How's everybody at home? Yours, Jim. And on the bottom right down here are a couple of other photographs that we have in our possession, which I think were Jim's photographs, that when he passed on, my grandmother rather, had in her possession. And again, just various scenes around Bermuda. He returns to Toronto from Bermuda. Somehow he makes his way via Guyana, which is nowhere near Bermuda, or he traveled again somewhere else. You can see here that he lists his trade as retired down here, and he lists his home. He's not visiting anyone. He lists his home as 367 Keewatin Avenue. So he considered that to be his home, and I guess he lived there for a bit. He also lists previous trips to Canada in both 1911 and 1929. Uncle Jim immigrates to Trinidad in 1936. And again, the family notes say to be able to live cheaply enough to get by on his Imperial War disability pension. There he marries Aunt Winnie, Winifred Donawa, on August 9th, 1937 in Port of Spain, Trinidad, in the British West Indies. You can see there's Aunt Winnie. She was a very beautiful young lady. He remains there until 1946. And recall the war years, World War II this time, is from 1939 to 1945. So he spends the war down there. And there he's employed at a prisoner of war camp in Trinidad as a guard. And there's a picture of that camp. And that camp housed exclusively very high-ranked Nazis. So it was kind of the country clubs of prison camps. So here is where Trinidad and Tobago is. Trinidad at the time was British West Indies was down here. And you can see, Bermuda was way the heck over here, and Guyana is way the heck down here. So in getting home from his trip to Bermuda, he must have gone to Bermuda and then down in this region and then come home after that. But eventually he goes down to Trinidad. Trinidad is just off Venezuela, as you can see. So it's one of the southernmost Caribbean islands. So it has one of the nicer climates, I would say. Jim knew what he was about. If we zoom in on Trinidad, there's a Port of Spain over here in the top left. And there's a little island here called Gaspar Grande. Here is a picture, and this looks to be Winnie sitting there. I've labeled her. This fella is sitting in front of the tree. Maybe it's her dad. And one of these two guys could be Jim. as well. I'm not 100% sure. The photo was too blurry. I had to really, it was a very small, blurry photograph, and I had to really enhance it and blow it up to get this much out of it. But it's written on the back that it was taken on Gas Force Island in Trinidad, British West Indies, in August of 1936. And there is no Gas Force Island, but maybe that was a nickname or how it was known at the time for Gaspar Grande Island, which is very close to Port of Spain, where Winnie and Jim got married. We have a record in October 1944 of Jim traveling alone to Miami, Florida. Now, the prison camp was run by Americans, so perhaps it's related to that. For some business reason, he went to the state. Note that over here, you can see this is the line where he's listed. He lists his name, his family name, as opposed to his given name, as Ross Penny. And that's something he did frequently. We see that again later on. So again, more evidence that he considers more Ross than a Penny. Lists his age here as 53 years old at that point. The next record I can find of Jim is after he's come back to Toronto. And he apparently returned just after 1949 with Winnie. But by 1962, they're living at 505 Bathurst Street. And again, this is the listing for the voter list. Again, he describes his last name as Ross Penny. And here's Jim and Winnie around late 50s, early 60s, perhaps. Here they are. There's a photo we've seen before. This is them at the cottage. That's Allan on the left and Jock on the right, and Jim and Winnie in the middle. It's at Leonard Lake. This is Phyllis, Allan's wife, my grandmother, along with Aunt Winnie. And here they're surveying a new house. I guess they bought into a new house construction at 505 Bathurst. There's Allan, I think same time, and Jim and Phyllis. This is up Bathurst Street. You can see there's not much of Bathurst Street at this point anyways, and this is one of these units is their new house. There they are with Uncle Mal, and again, under construction, obviously. And we know Jim passes November 22nd, 1970. So recall I was born in 1962, so I was 8 years old when Uncle Jim passed. So I still have some dim recollections of Uncle Jim. And I'm sure Jenny and Stuart and L'Oreal probably have some firmer recollections of him than I do. But he passes November 22nd, 1970. He's survived by Winnie, and I don't know when Winnie died. Okay, so that was our little detour for Uncle Jim. So getting back now to the main line of the immigration. So Jim and Alex, as you recall, they come together on the Megantic. This is his passport photo, and you can see there's a little attestation note by a magistrate, and that's the passport photo he used at the time. His age, he lists as 24 years old. His intended occupation is farm laborer. Again, object in coming to Canada to better my position. Alex had only $25 with him. Recall Jim had $1,000 with him, so Jim was better off, obviously, than Alex, and I guess he was looking after him. By whom was his passage paid? Passage was paid by some. I can't read the last word exactly. Maybe you can make it out. But it says overseas settlement something. So some organization, I guess, that was seeking to bring farmers over. He's destined for an employer, Mr. Bartlett in Suffield, Alberta. And he lists that, I believe that says uncle, state relationship. I think it says uncle. So I don't know who that is. I don't know. Didn't know he had an uncle, Mr. Bartlett. It wasn't a close uncle. I can't identify any Bartletts in the family tree. And as things have it, I don't know if he ever gets to Alberta because there's records of him working on a farm in Ontario soon after this. So I don't know if he ever makes it out to Alberta or not. And again, he lists his nearest relative as his father, Mr. John Clark Penny at 82A Harlow Road in Veruri. All right, so getting back, just a reminder, Jim and Alec came over together, May 1920. Annie was soon after. She went out to Manitoba. And then the rest of the family, Jock, Anne, with Allan and Mal, the two kids, Allan, the older one, about 16 at this point, came over in April 1921. And then they all converged in Toronto after that. So here's the passenger list for the Royal Mail steamer Corsican from April 1st, 1921, arriving in St. John's, New Brunswick. We see John Clark Penny listed here, age 47. We see Anne, Gavin Ross Penny, listed here, 43. We see Allan Penny here. He's actually, at this stage, his birthday isn't until later in the year. He's 15. That might be a 15, I guess, or a 13. But they got the middle name wrong. It's Allan Bruce Penny. And we have the birth certificate, so there's no confusion. So this must be garbled. And they have the baby, Annie's baby, Malcolm Sidney Penny, age 11 months at this point. The family lore has it that they hit an iceberg on the way over on the Corsican. That isn't true. The Corsican did hit an iceberg, but it was several years later. So it didn't happen on this trip. That's a nice piece of family lore that wasn't true. I should note that they have Anne's age wrong. Anne is 53 at the time, not 43. But so I guess they transcribed that incorrectly. Maybe they saw the 11-month-old kid and said, well, that's the mom and she can't be 53, so she must be 43. Maybe she looked young for her age. I'm not sure. But that's a definite error. And this points out one of the difficulties. You look at these old records and it's all fuzzy logic because there's always something that's wrong. Like Allan's middle name is wrong and Anne's age is incorrect, and possibly Allan's age is incorrect as well. But overall, you kind of look at it and you say, well, it's John Clark, it's Malcolm Sidney, it's Anne and Allan. Good enough. This must be them. This is some of the immigration documents that we have. There was a booklet, and this is the booklet, and this is the what's in the booklet. We see John Clark Penny. We see Allan Penny here. And we see Malcolm Penny down here, and it says that they had their various medical examinations and their vaccinations and things like that as of April 1st, 1921. Anne's card isn't here. This is John Clark Penny's immigration form 30A. It's the only one of this group that we have, so it's quite possible that only the head of the family and wives and children didn't necessarily fill them out. But this is their immigration papers. That it looks like they got that approved still in Scotland, and this is the photos they had taken at the time. This is what Allan looked like at the time. This was taken a little bit later when he's 16, but that's approximately what he looked like. And this is approximately what Mal looked like. Again, a little bit later than when they traveled, but that's approximately what they looked like. And so you can see over here that that born in Aberdeenshire, Scottish. He's coming over to do farm work. He didn't have a lot of money in his possession, only $50 in his possession at the time. I don't know what that meant. And this was his key piece of evidence I needed, that his father was in fact Robert Kelman Penny at One Presley Place in Inverary. Getting back now to Alex. There was a census done in 1921, and we've already seen the census for Annie, as you'll recall in a previous episode. At this time, she was in Melita, Manitoba. Her name was Annie Snedden. She had married Bob, and she was living in the Metropolitan Hotel, working as a waitress there at that point. So that same census was done, and we have the rest of the family, except for Uncle Jim. Jim might have been out of the country at the time. But here we see the entry where Alex is listed. We can see the household members. It's the Johnson household, and it's in Vaughan. And recall, Alex has stated on his immigration form that he was headed out west. But I don't know if he did go out and then came back in time for this. But he's now in Vaughan, which is quite near Toronto. I'll show you it on a map in a moment. And he's working there as a servant. A servant means an employee in this particular case. He is a laborer, a farm laborer. Here we have another three members of the family. This is John Clark Penny, Anne Penny, and Mal Penny, and they're located in Whitby. His occupation is listed as farm labor. He's actually a stockman. He takes care of the stock. They lived in a rented house by themselves. And here's where Allan wound up. So again, Allan is only he's only 15 or 16, and again, it's he's listed here as being in Darlington Township. Darlington is a bit to the east of Toronto. Again, a suburb of Toronto, really. And he's a farm worker. But very interesting that the family packaged him off and sent him somewhere else. He's not listed as being at the same address as anybody else, so that's interesting. So here's where everybody was. Jock, Ann, and Mal were over here in Whitby East on a farm. Allan was over here in Darlington on a farm. Alex was over here in Vaughan on a farm. And of course, Annie was way out in Melita, Manitoba, and we don't know where Jim was. And all of these people converge into Toronto soon after all of that, really as soon as possible. They just kind of get on their feet with the farm work, and or their passage in certain cases was paid. And that was the case with everybody except for Jim. Their passage was paid for by somebody else, and they came over cheaply in third class, so they had to kind of work off that initial payment. So this is one of the earliest family photographs in Toronto, and there's a caption on this that wasn't written by my dad. And the caption reads, "This is the old tent." And my dad writes, "A tent is pitched on the southeast corner of Mount Pleasant and Keewatin, used over the spring and summer of 1922 and 1923 while building the first permanent house at 367 Keewatin Street." So this was John Clark Penny building a house for the family and them living in this tent while they were building it. And we've seen this picture before, and left to right. We don't know who the chap on the far left is, but that's Bob, Annie's husband, Mal, Alec, and Annie. And this appears to be the same tent, just from a different angle. You can see the same wash basin and that same chimney. Here's Allan Penny, what he looked like when he was 18 years old, so right around this time. And that's Alec Penny at approximately the same date, so he was a bit older. And this was an old family photograph, the view from Mount Pleasant. So the tent was over here on this corner over here. The building site was at 367, just over, go up that hill and down over the brow of the hill there. And there's a park just behind it, the Sherwood Park. I went to Google Maps and I took the same shot. Yeah, there's the same slope up. And it looks like lots of the houses are in place, have been renovated obviously over the years, but it's coincidental. It's exactly 100 years apart that these two photos were taken. Not much has changed, except it got paved in the meantime. So this is the house in the foreground, the house under construction at 367 Keewatin. The footings and the basement walls were finished. We still have to dig out the cellar. They're going to dig out this dirt to go deeper. And this is looking north. Keewatin Street is in front of this. And this is looking across the street to another house that's already been erected on Keewatin. Interestingly, this house still stands, fundamentally the same, a little bit renovated, but fundamentally the same. And the way this works is the park, Sherwood Park, wraps around a little bit, and so the trees in the background are Sherwood Park. So here we see, this is where 367, the lot was over here. And as you can see, this is Sherwood Park wrapping around, and we were looking from about this vantage point across in this direction here. And the tent was over here on this corner. Here was where they pitched the tent. And this is the house as it stands now. Obviously, it's been completely renovated. I've got some pictures of the completed house. It looks completely renovated, but it's actually, that lot has a bit of a slope to it. and you'll see that in another picture. And this is that southeast corner, so the tent was pitched where this house is right now. And I went by myself because Keewatin is very close to where I live, and I snapped this photo. And this is directly across the street and a little bit down from 367 Keewatin. And so that's definitely the same house. I think it's little doubt about it, a little bit renovated. I went and knocked on the door, and they had a picture of the house hanging right there on the wall back when it was first built that looked exactly like that. This photo is from our album. So it's definitely, that is the same house. And they said that I needed to drop back because the people on the other side of the duplex were related to the family that first built this house. So I have yet to do that. I'll have to do that. So here we are looking back at 367 Keewatin. The siding is almost done, and it's all framed up. And now the siding's done, and they're up on the roof doing the shingling. And I think it was a combination of the family doing this work and some hired workers as well, because there are pictures of the workers, and we don't recognize them as family members. But I'm sure, being handy people, that the family was definitely pitching in. And then they put the brick veneer up. And there's the completed house, well, almost completed house. And that's Uncle Mal standing up here. I guess they've maybe moved in or about to move in anyways. And again, you can see the slope of that lot over here. And here's Anne, and there's Mal over there. And there's Mal there. Mal and Anne at 367 Keewatin. It's the new house. Must have been a relief after living in the tent for a while to get to move into the house. And there's a picture of the back of the house from the garden. So again, the front of the house is on the other side. Keewatin Street is there. We're in the garden. You can see they made a nice effort on the garden. Planted a bunch of things, not just for decoration. There was food back there. There we have another look at the garden. This is now from the house looking in the other direction. It's Erskine Avenue behind it, one south of Keewatin. And this is more decorative in the front part, and it's more functional. Food in the back part, separated by this little structure. There's Anne and Jock at around that time. The first winter in the new house is the caption. Granddad with grandma in her fox furs dressed to go out. Winter 1923-24. And then we have pictures from the next year, 1924, when the garden is starting to grow. The caption is, "The fruit tree and berry bushes are well established." And there's flowers in front of the arbor, vegetables behind, shrubs separating the two sections. At this time, Jock worked as a stonemason when he was in Toronto. So he reputedly worked, and this was what my dad had always told me, that he worked on the stone wall on the north side of Bayview, east of Lawrence, in front of the Sunnybrook Hospital grounds. And I believe my dad always said that this was his wall. Rather, he worked on this wall anyways. And when he pointed that out to me, it was identical to what it looks like now. So this is what it looks like now. That wall, so that was probably Jock's work. In January 21st of 1925, both Allan and Alec began work as bridgemen for the Grand Trunk Railway, which was later absorbed into the Canadian National Railways. Here's Jock, Mal, and Anne in 1927. Mal enters grade 1 at John Fisher Public School, which is nearby their house on Keewatin. At that point, it was called the Erskine School because it was on Erskine Avenue. And by the way, my kids went to John Fisher Public School and L'Oreal's. Again, I think we've seen this picture before, but this is at the time, 1927. Anne, Allan, Alec, Jock, and Mal. Right around this time, they buy a new car. So this is the first penny car in Toronto. And that's Anne, Mal, and Jock posing in front of the car. It's a beaut, isn't it? And here's Anne and Mal posing in front of the car. And here's Allan and Mal posing in front of the car as well. Allan's looking kind of daggers at Mal, and Mal's looking a bit upset. I wonder if he was misbehaving at the time. And here it is with the storm windows up in the front porch, so it's all enclosed. There's a garage. They're about to excavate a garage in front for the new Penny family car. I find this photo interesting. These little structures here, these pyramid structures, look like they're made of stone, and they look like they're very much wrapped around this. And Jock was a stone mason, and I believe he was a Freemason. Certainly, I know my granddad became a rather high order Freemason. That's a secret society originally of the Masons. And maybe this is a kind of Freemason signal. Freemason lives here. I'm not 100% sure. The pyramid is part of their symbology. So, very interesting stuff. The Pennies are now firmly entrenched in Canada and in Toronto in particular, with good jobs and is starting to develop families at this point. So in the next episode, we'll have a look at Phyllis Penny, my grandmother, and her meeting of Allan Penny, the marriage, and the birth of the kids. So until next time, one more toast to the Pennies. Cheers.